Well, welcome everybody. It's been a little while. It's been a minute. We're going to talk today about the petrodollar. Jerry, we've had some news reports in the last couple weeks. I thought it was very interesting. I thought for a little while there, everyone was getting very hyped up about this news piece. So tell us a little bit about what the news is, what the narrative that's being pushed out there is, and then we can provide a little bit of discussion for our viewers.
Sure. So a 50-year pact between Saudi Arabia and U.S. The story, the narrative that was swirling around X was this very end of the U.S. Signed petrodollar, this amazing privilege that the U.S. had, and Saudi Arabia pricing their oil in U.S. dollars was not renewed. So this was swirling, obviously, in a time where we're seeing immense moves to de-dollarize and move away from the U.S. dollar, and threats of U.S. dollar hegemony. This seemed to be as though like it was going to be the nail in the coffin, so to speak. So it was swirling around, and so you had one side, and if you go to a website called allsides.com, did Saudi Arabia end its petrodollar agreement with the U.S.? So you have actually through allsides.com a good read of both sides, what the sender is writing, what the right is writing, and it's very important to discuss what's going on and try to decipher what and why these news pieces are coming out the way that they're being delivered to us.
So basically last week then there was a report came out. Yeah, it was going all over X. They were saying there's a 50-year contract for the petrodollar and Saudi Arabia didn't renew. That's basically what it came down to.
Yeah.
And quick summary of the petrodollar, that the US goes off the gold standard. Henry Kissinger says, okay, how are we going to maintain control of the dollar? Well, if Saudi Arabia agrees to trade oil in US dollars and make it the reserve currency for the world, and we will offer them protection militarily. And over the last few years, we've seen more and more countries becoming unipolar with regard to trade, and Saudi Arabia seems to be going in that same direction as well.
Multipolar.
So
Multipolar.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Multipolar. So Saudi Arabia has been moving in that direction anyway. So
Yeah.
is it a nothing burger?
Certainly, it seems like it was already meant to happen. The moves were being made, so it was just a good revelation of of this agreement, that there was a move, that there is a move to the M payment systems towards the BRICS. So there is this West versus East, rivalry. Who's going to maintain? Who's going to have this world's reserve currency status? So we follow guys like Vince Lancy. I'm going to share it my screen because he posted something, a report that came out of UBS that tried to say, this is not the demise of the U.S. dollar. And I think we have to kind of start there. I'm going to share my screen so we can read that. Hopefully you guys can see it. So this is it from Goldfix. This is Vince Lancy's report. UBS reports that Google Trends are reporting an astonishing spike in searches for petrodollars in the past 2 weeks to the highest on record. This is apparently because the viral story that broke that Saudi Arabia failed to renew this 50-year deal to keep deal with the U.S. to keep their oil priced in U.S. dollars. The U.S. and Saudi Arabia did establish Joint Commission for Economic Cooperation back in 1974 with Henry Kissinger. This aim was to help Saudi Arabia spend a sudden glut of dollars on U.S. products in July of that year. Saudi agreed to invest oil dollars in U.S. treasuries. This was kept confidential until 2016. And they write, UBS writes, oil has always traded in non-dollar currencies. And in January of 2023, Saudi indicated that it was happy to negotiate oil sales in other currencies. Possibility changes little for financial markets, says UBS. Doesn't change anything. Saudi Arabia's rial, their currency, remains pegged to the dollar, and its stock of financial assets are dollar focused. The dollar reserve status depends on how money is stored, not how transactions are denominated. And that made me scratch my head, Jeremy.
Yeah, that's
I
a
just want
that.
to,
Go ahead.
I just want to share my perspective on that. Your thoughts on that before I get into mine.
I would say um, that it's interesting because other countries around the world are dumping treasuries, so they obviously don't require storing the quote unquote money, the dollar reserve money, and that seems to me to be the key part of that whole passage. That okay, Saudi Arabia is continuing to maintain U.S. treasuries and U.S. denominated instruments, but other countries are not. So that's how I
Right.
would view it. How about you?
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And among them, I mean, and as UBS notes this, that the Saudi real remains pegged to the US, suggesting that this is somehow more significant than Saudi Arabia selling its oil in other currencies. I think that's massive. My
Yeah.
perspective differs
Yeah.
than UBS
Okay.
because a currency's enduring value depends on its adoption and utility, not merely just being pegged. A currency remains relevant if it's widely used. Conversely, many cryptocurrencies over the decades have come and gone. We've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of cryptos. They've just simply faded away due to lack of adoption and utility. I mean, while the real, the Saudi currency, is pegged at 3.75 to every US dollar, it doesn't negate the decline in US economic dominance. The US loses substantial sums when oil transactions bypass the USD. Although the peg's continuity, that the mere fact that there is still a peg, to me implies that the US dollar will return being backed by gold and silver. Now, just back to the whole bypassing the US dollar and why this is a something burger and not a nothing burger.
Okay.
We go back to go back a few years when
Yeah.
back in 2020, where this is a focus that 2000, when Saddam Hussein decided to sell their oil reserves in euros. And
Yeah.
as Time magazine wrote this back in 2000, the switch to euros would cost the UN a small fortune in accounting paperwork changes. So it's not a nothing burger. It costs a lot of money. It costs dominance. It would also reduce the interest earnings and reparation payments that Iraq was making for damage it caused during the Gulf War, a shortfall the Iraqis would have to make up. So that was a huge something burger back then. It even caused, some say that the U.S. had to go and take out Saddam Hussein, right?
Yeah. Well, I think as well, the fact that UBS is also saying, well, the petrodollar never mattered. What only ever mattered is that it was backed that the Saudi rial was pegged to gold and that they hold U.S. instruments,
Mm,
right? This feigning of, well, the petrodollar never really mattered.
yeah.
I think that's an interesting aspect of that article in there. Look, I think we can see that. Okay, what do you got going here?
And that's just another example, Jeremy, why Gaddafi had to go, right?
Right.
African gold, the oil, and the challenge to monetary imperialism. Before this was a cause for war, right? When the minute that you threatened the US dollar dominance and trade from oil for US dollars or US dollars for oil, this signaled war. To know that as a country, I would have to now go to the foreign exchange markets, buy immense amount of US dollars, which is revenue, to buy oil. That is a huge deal. So this is much, much more than just being pegged as UBS notes. A peg does not generate income at all. It does signify that it's relevant, but it's not being used because countries could just bypass the US dollar and buy up Saudi oil.
Yeah, I think the takeaway is basically that there is a narrative that's been floated in the last week and a half that whether or not there's a petrodollar seems to not matter anymore, at least to UBS, that Saudi Arabia is looking at different transacting in different currencies. They're not in a rush to dump US dollars, but the world is seeing the narrative that there is a multipolar currency universe out there and that that the Saudis are open for business. And so I think that, again, one of the takeaways is that there's other currencies that can be used,
Mhm.
that the petrodollar is effectively dead. It doesn't matter what new news comes out to put another nail in the coffin, that the system's changing. And so I
Mhm.
think that's why that story went viral.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
confirmation of
certainly.
that.
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's also confirmation that the US right now it needs to straighten out its finances. It needs to straighten out its books, its reserves, highlight on gold reserves around the world. And the solution is a very quick one, isn't it, Jeremy? It's a very quick solution to ensure that they do not lose the dominance, the hegemony of having oil and other assets priced in US dollars. And that's just going back to the whole peg situation, where I think the mere fact that the peg continuity is implying, in my opinion, a belief that the US dollar will return to being backed by gold and silver as well.
Well, we'll have to watch as it all unfolds. I know next we want to do a video talking about the peg and talking about the unit and Enbridge and the whole brick situation. So there's a lot to follow. So stay with us.
Yeah.
All right, we'll talk to you all soon.
All right. See you next time.